The transformation from a mill town to one of the most important technological cities in the world, the Rocket City, has been directly parallel to the growth and evolution of the city of Huntsville's education system, an evolution that started long before the birth of Redstone Arsenal, as the path for higher learning for African Americans was almost non-existent. First known as the City School, the first public high school for African Americans in Huntsville, Alabama, was opened in the basement of the Lakeside Methodist Episcopal Church in 1865. Affectionately called Dear Old Councill, the high school was named after former slave William Hooper Councill, who in 1875, with the support from state officials, used the Morrill Act of 1862, a land grant, to open the first college for blacks in Huntsville, Alabama, Huntsville Normal School. With only 2 teachers and 61 students, in 2 years it not only developed an industrial education program, but readied others to become teachers, as William Councill understood the need for making sure that a pipeline of education for blacks in Huntsville was established. Years later, it became what is now Alabama A&M University. After Huntsville defied Governor George Wallace and became the first city to integrate schools in the state in 1963, Councill High School soon closed its doors in 1966. Graduates said the school had been a special place for the entire black community for decades, as it was the only high school for black students in Huntsville, Alabama. If you went to school in Huntsville, you went to dear old Councill. One of those graduates is Theresa DeShields. Celebrated as a living legacy, she is one of the few original William Hooper Councill High School teachers still living. As a native and virtual lifelong resident, she has a unique understanding of the civil rights movement and path to upward mobility for countless local African Americans. Her life reflects the challenges of a hardworking local family, her education at Councill High School, and then Alabama A&M University, and as an educator, historian, civil rights researcher, and community resident. Joined by Kelly Hamlin and Brenda Chunn, Theresa DeShields recounts her journey during this period and shares her thoughts and a message to our youth.
We are delighted to be here with Mrs. Theresa DeShields, a living legend in Huntsville history, and to have a conversation with her today about the things that she's seen over her life and the people she's come to know and the history that she's seen happen here in Huntsville. So we're delighted that you've chosen to spend the afternoon with us, truly. I really appreciate that, and I know Brenda does too.
Well, I'm very happy that you are involved in a process that's going to make for change.
It's important,
And it's critical.
I have to say that it's always an honor to be in your presence, Mrs. DeShields.
Oh, my.
And that just speaks volumes to me and for all of the Councillians who are listening to this today. And I have to say that as a result of that, we're on the site of William Hooper Councill High School. This was our football field. We're here at the Huntsville Library. This was our football field. We enjoyed many evenings. In many ways, we're bringing you back to a place that you're very, very familiar with. And in the history of William Hooper Councill High School, the historic William Hooper Councill High School, as one of our former teachers, I think we're in a season now where we have about 4 teachers who remain, who are yet living. And we have always treated Mrs. DeShields with respect as a living legacy. So I'm so...
I haven't internalized that.
Not that legacy part, the living, I'm sure.
Well,
but
the whole thing.
Yes, yes. Well, we delight in your presence.
Yes, thank you, Brenda.
Thank you. And the first question that we'd like for you to talk a little bit about is your origins here in Huntsville, in the Huntsville community.
Well, I did dig some of these pictures up and got pictures of my mother, grandmother, my grandfather, and other members of the family. These are pictures that were taken at Councill High when I was a student there. And
What grade did you enter Councill?
I entered at the first grade.
First grade,
And
elementary.
Yeah, and I went through 11 grades. I skipped one. Miss Allen, you remember Miss Rowland?
Yes.
She tutored us in the summer for the next grade, which I skipped, which was the 5th grade. And that put me a grade ahead, which was a plus, I guess.
Always, yes.
So you were asking about the families and about the history.
Where were you born? Where
I
did
was
your family
born,
live?
that I put forth, I'll read it for you, Salat.
Okay.
I was born in Huntsville, Alabama in 1933. My parents were William Henry Powers and Al Brandon Powers. We lived at 807 West Clinton Street. I attended kindergarten when I entered William Hooper Council at 1st grade. I attended the school until I graduated in 1950. Then I was skipped to the 3rd grade. Upon graduation, I attended Alabama A&M University, from which I graduated in 1954. Then I came back and taught at William Hooper Councill High School as a social studies teacher until integration in 1967. I went to California for a year, then I came back, and I taught at A&M from 1969 to 1998, which is roughly 42 years total of work. Now, you were asking about the generations and the preceding persons.
And where were you born? Where did you live in Huntsville?
I lived
on what street did you live on?
West Clinton Street.
Clinton Street,
807
okay.
West Clinton.
West Clinton Street.
And that was, Clinton was divided into East and West as it is today. I guess they still say West Clinton, don't
yes,
they? Well, the people of non-color lived on the other end, which is East. And blacks lived in the West.
On the West,
It was a very critical line of demarcation between the two areas, and critical in terms of opportunities, education, and all things that you would think would be different.
How old were you when you were aware of that?
I don't really know how old I was when I became aware of that, but I became very sensitive and concerned as we were asked to move from West Clinton Street to, well, the car manager, owner, I won't call his name, he came knocking on the door, and he said to me that you're going to have to move because we're going to put I-565 here. And I said, well, what about the lady next door, just to get a feel of him? And he said, I said, she's an elderly lady, she's been here a long time too. He said, you talking about Frances? That was her first name. And I said to him, how old do you have to be to refer to her as Mrs.? She's had a husband there, Mrs. But I got no answer to that. And probably that was the knife that tended to really turn in me when I sensed that indifference to my question.
When do you think that was?
We were preparing to move to I-565 change. So that occurred in the 60s. We built a house at where we are now in 1957. So that was maybe 2 or 3 years before that move, because we had it. The builder was slow in getting it together, and it took longer than we thought. We had to pay extra for the overtime, but that's what happened.
That had to be, like you said, kind of turning the knife in you, realizing that in that moment that this street that had been a part of your community was about to be erased.
Right, and has been erased. And now they're talking about it again.
Well, during that period, and my family was a part of that move too.
Right, because you were on the corner there of
Pulaski and Daisy. And Daisy no longer, they just wiped, it just wiped it out. Do you have information on family origins?
Yes, I'm a descendant of 3 families that have deep roots in the Huntsville community. Brandon family, Powers family, and the Penny family. My great-grandmother's maiden name was Penny, P-E-N-N-Y. So that's a combination of 3. I'm a descendant of 3 families that have deep roots in the Huntsville community. Brandon Powers, and Penny. My great-great-grandmother's maiden name, Penny, was Penny, as I just said. Based on the census, Robert, quote, Bob, unquote, Brandon, and Martha had 7 sons.
My goodness.
Henderson, Oliver, Robert, Daniel, Claudius, Alfred, and Williams, and 7 daughters, Sophia, Martha, Mary, Amanda, Minerva, maybe it's Minerva, Cecilia, and Jane. Robert Bob Brandon was a slave owned by William Brandon, and he was born in 1807 in Virginia. Robert Bob Brandon died in 1878, and he hired his time out to save money. According to his will, Robert Bob Brandon owned 80 acres that he left to two of his sons, William and Alfred. They were brick masons, and you have heard about and read about the early history of Huntsville and the bricklayers. And some of the buildings are still here that they laid the brick for.
That your family was?
Yes.
Most of the buildings
Yes.
are still
Yes,
here. Yes,
I'm being modest here. But that's a reality. And when they wanted to find building, an architect, they came to Dan Brandon.
That's right.
Or one of the Brandons. And they hired their own out to do the work. So it's interesting that that process has been changed so significantly.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so my grandfather, William Twink, is who I remember most, Twink, is a descendant of this family. He was born in 1886. He was a driver for Armo Trucking. Now, you know where Armo Trucking is still existing? There, if you cross the Clinton Street, there's a building, there's office buildings to the left at the intersection to come over here, this direction. That's where he worked. And it's interesting, the building is still there. My grandfather was a truck driver for Armo. Jeremiah Powers was born in 1807, and he was a blacksmith, Jeremiah Powers. Jeremiah and Mary Powers had 3 sons named Frank, Lavonia, Edward, and Albert. Albert was born in 1844, and he married Susan. They had 4 sons, Lomas, Prophet, Albert, and Clarence. Albert Powers died in 1882 of malaria. Clarence Powers and Rosetta Brown Powers were the parents of my father, William Henry Powers. He was born in 1897. He had a sister named Susie Powers Gandy, as you remember, was born in 1902. Clarence Powers was a mailman, and the picture I've showed you earlier.
Susie Powers Gandy was our music teacher
Right,
at William
right,
Hoover
for
Council.
many years.
For many
and Carmelita
years.
kind of fell in.
Carmelita Gandy is
after that.
a living legend.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And Clarence Albert Powers died in 1882 of malaria. Clarence Powers and Rosetta Brown Powers were the parents of my father. William Henry Powers was born in 1897, and he had a sister named Susie Gandy, I'm repeating myself, was born in 1902. Clarence Powers was a mailman, you said that before. Based on his will, he owned 5 houses he left to his heirs. John Penny was born around 1837, and John Penny and Martha Penny were the parents of John Walter Penny, and he was their only child. I'll get to the end in a minute. John Walter Penny married Ella Beckworth on March 1884. He was a Pullman porter, and she was a nurse. They had 2 children, Theresa and Maddie. Theresa was born in 1888. She died in 1919. My grandfather then married her sister, Maddie, who took care of my mother, Ella Brandon. She was born in 1911. After she passed, she took care of her. She passed in 1979, and our home at 807 West Clinton Street was inherited from my mother and the Penny family. So we were there all that time until the desire to build the highway.
Interstate 565.
Right, yeah, 565.
You have a wonderful family lineage and heritage there, and the beauty of that is that you've captured, the names and the relationships and the work. And what I'm struck by is the fact that coming out of, you have some acknowledgments of enslavement, and coming out of slavery that your people went on to be tradespeople. I hear that a lot in what you're sharing, that they were tradespeople as opposed to farming.
Right.
And that's notable. And it makes me come to this question in terms of the community. And I also acknowledge the inheritances. Land was passed on, homes were passed on.
Very critically organized plans.
Quickly organized and with an intent for wealth, means, the wherewithal to go to future generations. And that is so characteristic of what I'm familiar with. And my question is, what exactly did you experience, and would you say were some strengths of the community? Because obvious family strengths, but what were strengths that flow from the community and also from the family and to the community? Strengths and weaknesses.
Well, their work ethic is one, and their commitment to look to the future for their children to have some level of comfort.
To be better off
than
the present generation.
Right. And so they would work toward those ends to satisfy and meet the needs of their children. And I think that was one thing. But also they were, well, aside from hard workers, they had plans, because you can't do anything without a plan. They had very clearly enunciated plans. So when they died, you could see in the wills, it was clearly enunciated what they left, who it went to, and so forth. So
that is an enormous strength.
It is.
That it wasn't just, well, I'm just going to take care of myself, you know, but all of these that I'm responsible for.
I find that very interesting.
Any particular weaknesses? Obvious ones, but in your experience?
Weaknesses in the
community.
Well, poverty was an overriding factor, and lack of education for many. But some few were educated in that area. Indifference of the city to do anything to improve the conditions is a harsh reality. And I see that today. And some things have come about to help improve the community. Building of new houses all around the area where I live, that's a big plus. And a school, new school. That's very, in fact, there was question about even building a school there. In fact, they were planning not to build a school there, but that changed.
Well, I always say that children and schools are the express the intent that the future, you know, should go on. That we should prepare for the future, for a bright future. Yeah.
You mentioned the segregated nature of Clinton, where you grew up, and your experience there as they're bringing 565 right through your neighborhood where you grew up. Can you recall any other specific memories of life there in the era of true segregation, where there's a strong African American community that has had to be independent of the white community in a number of ways? Can you share any memories of that time, or any, can you take us back to any scenes of the time, any places that were a heart of the community?
Well, yes, my church, Lakeside United Methodist, was a heart of the community. In the later years, but originally we were located on, what street is that, Brenda?
Lakeside was on, it's around from church.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was one of the things that was a plus. And of course, Councill High. Because we all, only school we had to go to was Councill High. So the sit-ins that you mentioned here, the sit-ins were a natural follow-up of the entangled problems that pre-existed. And it is, it was no way around it. I think the black community needed it and wanted change. They were seeking to have places to sit in the lunch counters and eat, and without any hassle. But equally, their march cry was, we are you have carpet on your floor, we have rats at our door. That was a cry, and that was true. And I do have some notes on one of the articles written in the publication about the bad conditions of Councill High.
You were at Councill during this period of students starting to act as activists and be involved in sit-ins, and you also have this relationship with A&M, which was also an important driver of the civil rights movement. So can you tell us more about what you saw happening there, and probably some children who you had seen grow up and then come to take part in this, and then your role in it too? I'm sure you were also a role model for them at the time.
And I would ask that question in this way. What's the first thing that impressed you that you needed to be involved or to act in a certain way? Was there something, a day, a situation?
Well, I suppose the mounting
particular?
problems that we encountered just going to school, because I lived on West Clinton, and there's a whole, you see the railroad tracks right over here? Those are the tracks we had to walk across, because they were more definitely laid out because they changed the landscape, but the old tracks are still there. So we had to walk on those tracks summer, winter, fall, and flood, because I remember going across those tracks when Huntsville flooded some years ago, and my feet were very close to the water, because it's just a wooden plank there and metal on the side that makes up the railway.
I walked those tracks, not because I had to necessarily, but sometimes I just wanted to.
Well, I walked
you had to.
because I had to.
Yes, and it's quite a difference.
It is a difference.
Yeah.
Some years difference.
Some years difference, and from what you're sharing, my class graduated, the last class, in '66, and you were there a year after. And so were there things that you did before the class my class graduated, and you were a teacher then, and then when you went on to Alabama A&M? What was your most active part in the civil rights?
To guide them in a way. You know, there was tension with the principal, who was at first very positive when they hit the streets, but then I sensed that he was re-guided and kind of moved away from it a little bit, but it was a transition that occurred. You remember that? Yeah. So what guided me mostly, you're saying? I don't know how I was guided. If you want to know what guided me to write about it, was my concern about the problems that existed and the need for change. I remember when we had a very heavy snow in 1962, and I had free time, therefore I wasn't going to work. I said, I'll start writing and research while I'm doing this. And that was the beginning, but I had it already in mind that I was going to do it, but I hadn't had any time or opportunity to do it. So that kind of pushed me to get started on it, because I wanted.
That's making me think of another question, but I'll let
you can ask it.
I'm just wondering, was there any negative response to your research?
You know, I'm one who wears my clothes loosely, and if it was, I didn't really pay any attention to it because I knew it was the right thing to do.
It was an important work.
It was important work.
Yes.
Yeah.
In your thesis, it really comes through clearly that the leaders in the African American community, the leaders of the Community Service Committee, the people who were on the biracial committee for the city, really acted wisely in putting pressure on the right places in the city to make city leaders understand that the city's economy, business interests, Redstone Arsenal and Marshall would be negatively impacted if the city didn't embrace this change.
Yeah, and threats were made in some of the letters that were sent to the key people in charge who didn't want the action to be a reality, the sit-ins. And a letter was sent to the person with NASA, telling him, I think it was NASA, that if you don't cooperate with us, we will just move out of Huntsville and go somewhere else and attend to the business.
And all it takes is for that news to circulate in the
Right,
community
right.
because many, many Huntsvillians,
Right.
white and black,
Right.
had something to lose.
Right.
And it's the very livelihood
Right.
that you're
Right.
looking to. Yeah.
I remember reading just the other day about a Mrs. I don't remember her name, but she was a lawyer. Her husband was a lawyer in Huntsville in 1938. And she said, I didn't plan to live here in poverty or getting one case every once in a while. I want more done, and I think we can do it. So that was a very positive, continuous attitude by the whites in Huntsville to want to create change too, because they were looking at it from an economic standpoint. Of course, we had more social concern.
So how do you feel like there were any points where that butted heads to some extent, where you have students and activists who were boots on the ground who really are pushing for social change, but there may be some leaders or members of the white community who would rather just go ahead and get this done with and not necessarily sweep it under the rug, but let's get this taken care of.
Sure.
But I feel like there's somewhat of a contrast between high-level committee meetings about how to change things in the city's interest and the boots on the ground students who have lived the difference between Councill High and the white high schools, and who have lived the difference between the west and east side of Clinton. So can you speak some to the experiences of those who were the boots on the ground as well?
Who were anxious to
sit-ins,
get involved.
Those who
Well,
wore blue
too,
jeans
yeah.
on Blue Jeans
That's
Sunday.
Yeah, like Mr. Adams, who lives down the street from me still, is 103, I think, years old. And he took upon himself to take trips to buy khaki blue jeans for the people marchers to wear, rather than buying them in Huntsville. So it was money made that he felt shouldn't be made under these conditions. So that was one of the things I remember happening. And I've had a tape of him when I was in college at A&M. One of the semesters we dealt with civil rights, and I made a tape, and I gave it to him a few years ago. And I'm sure he still has it, of what he said and what he did, because he was very active in the civil rights movement.
He's an individual that we have spoken about,
Yeah,
Mr. Adams.
yes, he's 103, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're both familiar with Blue Jeans Sunday and that particular organized event. Would you mind explaining it for our audience, because that's a really interesting little chapter.
Well, it's to me very simple, because all was decided was we want to not to spend our money in Huntsville, Alabama. Why are you mistreating us? And so he went to, I guess, Birmingham or Nashville.
It was the early form of boycotting.
Yeah,
yes.
it was. It was. And it was successful. The letter writing, the boycotting, telling key people what they were going to do and not do. So there was a very vocal white group who supported the change for a reason I've indicated. They wanted a change to come too. And I think it couldn't have been possible without their support. For example, when they would sit in the restaurants to eat, they would sometimes order more food than they wanted to make sure that the citizens could have
share
food and could share. And that was very interesting too. And those who didn't want to be there, didn't want to share, they didn't leave when to eat somewhere else. So they had a level of force of support.
You know, Mrs. DeShields, that makes me think of, I think, a conversation I was having even earlier today, that the thing that is the strength of the Huntsville community, which has always been, it's been educated with the colleges, Alabama A&M, Oakwood, then UAH, with the faith in the community, and with the sense of investment in the community. We all have something to lose. That the thing that has been the strength of the community has also been its greatest weakness, in that we did not have a overly violent civil rights experience here. We gave way to what was needed in terms of accommodations, educations, logically, and with a reasoned approach. And that's a strength in the community, but it also lulls us into a sense of maybe we can just go along, maybe we can just get along. So as often is said, the thing that is your strength is also your weakness. Sure. And I'm just struck by how much that might have been the case and might be the case here in Huntsville. And it's one of the reasons why this opportunity is so important, because we have to share those things that were difficult, those things that were painful, that were wrong, just out and out wrong, and those things that we did right. And they belong to the entire community. And the Blue Jeans Sunday, I was just a child. And but I had no idea what blue jeans were. And it's like, we're gonna get some blue jeans? Well, what is that? What is that? And where are we gonna get them from? And we went through that whole experience, but behind it was an economic impact where businesses, you're not going to enjoy the profit that you would expect to have for Easter, because we're going to do something differently. And what business person would want to experience that? It becomes, this is not in my interest to continue in this way. So there are many, many experiences that we're just sharing here that I'm really having aha moments about in terms of how the significance really was for these events.
Right.
You mentioned that at a point, the principal at Councill High became a little less supportive of students being so involved.
I sensed that. I don't know if that was what happened.
Well, I was wondering, do you think he was concerned about their safety doing it? Or just making
He was a black man in a white world, and he was principal. And he had to do what he was supposed to do by those over him, as today.
He had something to lose.
He had something to lose.
Yes.
That is something that we have found in learning more about the time too, is that you have high school students, for example, have less to lose, are willing to get out there and feel like they can put it all on the line, but people who are already professionals, who have families to worry about, jobs, who are in the spotlight a little bit more, it was a great risk to be involved and to...
Well, I look at the millions of, I'm sure, many thousands who have students, high school students, who across the nation have come against and opposing conditions in their school, killing of each other.
Recently.
So I can't feel that they're insensitive or not involved in what's going on. That's, to me, telling that they're still sticking with it, and they haven't left it. And I'm saying that it's not dead with all. It's not dead with but the few. And they have reasons not to.
So did you see any contrast in how students were involved, Alabama A&M students as opposed to Councill High students? Do you feel like there were more high schoolers as opposed? I had heard also that at Councill students were discouraged from being out in the spotlight too much. Is that
I don't know that discouragement really entered into play a major role at all, because they were the primary, and everything I've read says that it was Councill High students who were the centerfold of the protest. And that I mentioned, I don't think it had any, it may have had some on the teachers. I don't even think it had any strength on the teachers. I think people had decided what they wanted to do, and they wanted to do it.
And even as teenagers, people were able to come together and have strength in a group together and really make changes in the city.
And I think the change was dictated in a sense by those, once again, who wanted change at the top. And they were interested in doing it and following through whatever means necessary to do it. And they felt that the core of any city development has to be the economic growth. That's over and over repeated in the thesis, in my observation. Growth, financial, and building, missile program, all of that was a spill out of that desire to make for a change, where their children too could have a better life. Because many of them were just kind of on the edge, like the lady whose husband was a lawyer. She still wanted some better chance because she didn't want one time a year, one time to have this experience.
And I think as a graduate of William Hooper Councill High School, we owe a tremendous debt to our classmates who were willing to sit in at the lunch counters and who were willing to face the dogs and the water hoses that others were not, going to find themselves in that situation, were forbidden.
Weren't in a position.
Were absolutely forbidden. So we owe those Councillians a debt of gratitude. We owe the members of the community who had independent economic means, doctors, lawyers. They weren't tied to city, state, to government employment, and they could take some challenges, some risk,
On both sides.
on both sides, absolutely. So we owe those individuals a great debt of gratitude in the community.
But we're not going to let them rest
No, they can't rest.
because the problems are still
We still
here.
have work to do.
The problems
Yes,
are still
we
here.
still have work to do. And consequently, that's why we're here
Sure,
on a day
I
like
know,
today.
I know.
Putting it on the record.
Right, right.
Now, you have certainly touched on this, on part of what made things go the way they did in Huntsville. But can you say a little more about how Huntsville may have seemed different from or similar to how things were happening in other parts of the country?
Well, the things we pointed out, jobs, a base of wealth, money, determination, education, a commitment to improve the communities. All of this was centered here in terms of the state of Alabama in Huntsville. And you had, luckily, good leadership in the white community who pushed for these things, as I say, keep saying over and over. But everything I read comes right back to this group as the motivation for it. But then you can't eliminate the motivation that blacks had for the problems that we shared. So it was it was a force of both interests coming together, gelling, I think.
Are there any other particular moments or events that you feel had a particular impact on how things went in Huntsville? You mentioned Blue Jeans Sunday and the letter writing campaign. Are there any other particular memories of things that seemed impactful as changes were coming in Huntsville, or memories of the first time that these trickled down to actually impact your life too?
Well, my memories were shaped, as you said, by Councill High first and then Alabama A&M University. And I'm sure that in the process of writing the thesis, and I came in contact with a lot of things and that were helpful and positive and motivated me to continue the research. So I felt the record needed to have been made of what happened, and I was committed to do that.
You created a quite valuable record, and I continue to be impressed by everyone who you interviewed and all of the research that you did in the process of the thesis, and the fact that you completed it right in the midst of this makes it
In real time.
Yes, makes it such
It keeps coming
1
back.
million
It won't go away. And I've had a lot of students and adults like you, graduate students, who were trying to set up appointments with me, and I hope they'll forgive me for telling them that I just didn't have the energy, not the time. But I tried to, but it was overwhelming.
Of course.
And I had to make decisions. So I decided on this, but it's the last one.
We appreciate it.
We are so pleased that you give us that nod and give us this opportunity, because it's so valuable to have the opportunity to hear from your own perspective about these experiences. You are talking about And we can all agree that these are still challenges that we have, what we're talking about. There's still challenges that we have today. And so to Huntsville, in particular, your community, you've known Huntsville from the beginning. What would you say to Huntsville today? What would you say to our youth today in terms of what we need to persist with our civil rights?
A, improve access to well-rounded public transportation. B, job fairs on a semi-annual basis for entry level to professionals. C, develop programs for people with disadvantaged backgrounds, including job training. D, provide free child care while parents are in job training. E, identify community colleges in preparing for jobs existing in the area. F, develop vibrant community by reducing crime, which I referred to. Ensure equity, that would give me peace. Ensure equity in resources for schools. H, diversity in the faculty in the schools. There's diversity existing, but there's still some problems there.
Well, when you look at certification for certification, you look at experience for, compared to experience, and, the racial background, all of those parity issues. That's where equity is.
You're right.
And I don't know how it is that we miss that.
And to finish the list, it was to register and organize to get out to vote. And J, improve all neighborhoods to be safe and free from drug activity. And K, improve housing and identify housing needs.
That sounds like a comprehensive to-do list.
It is.
And if we could work in that context actively, we could solve problems in the community.
Yeah, I agree. The message for the students of Huntsville, I tell you, I listened the other night at the minister who spoke and at the wedding. And I wrote down, some comments that he made.
Bishop Curry.
Yeah, Bishop Curry. And I thought it was well worth our thoughts because he was seeking love. When all else fails, love and peace can come together. And I think that's the ultimate end that we need to work toward. Peace and love. And he spelled it out very clearly, didn't he?
Mrs. DeShields referenced Lakeside, and that was my origin, my church of origin, and Jefferson Street is where the old church was. And Mrs. DeShields is a member yet today. And that sounds like you just took that right out of the page of your faith experience, that we really must show love in the community. And I think that as important as is what we do, is how we do.
Sure, it is.
And I think that's what you're speaking to.
It is. And that's a very heavy challenge, and one that the whole world bears.
Absolutely.
And I don't know the answers to how we can do it. I guess first of all, you have to think about what you want and how you can make the change you want to make. But I think the rhetoric I see on television today, every day, it's very bad, and it's changing our view and values too rapidly. And I don't know how long we can go in that direction and lose what is right, what can be right in the society. That's troublesome to me. But then there's a powers behind us greater than we are. But you have to think about it.
Oh, absolutely. That is just such a faith expression. And I'm really so happy. You know, I knew you in the context of the school, and I'm so happy to hear you get to the end of our interview today within the context of your faith. Because so often we lose the power that is contained there. And so this is just a wonderful compliment. It's a wonderful compliment to what we have been talking
Yes,
about.
yes,
And an important message.
yes,
Absolutely.
yes.
Are there any particular individuals whose names should be recorded in history for their involvement and their role?
Yes, the two, Francis, what was her name?
Sims.
Sims, and the young man's name was, it was two students who took a leadership role in that protest movement.
Two council students.
Two council students. So those names should be, and in the community, we had a list, one I've named here, Mr. Adams, and of course, the Cashins, the notes, most of the notes that I took came from her. She was the secretary.
Joan Cashin.
Joan. She was the secretary. Now she's written a book. I know she has a heavy section in her book on civil rights and sit-ins and all of that. And her husband was very active. I didn't even remember him buying an airplane, but that was in the notes I read. But it's an interesting time.
And it also is important that, as you have, that we recognize all of the many students who weren't just the ones whose names we may put up on top, but it took
Oh, it took
Everyone.
Took everyone.
Yeah.
And they were committed to follow through. It lasted, I think, about 6 months. That's right. And it had significant changes. Well, they decided to send certain students, 12th grade, they desegregated. And so I left and went to California at that time, so I wasn't even involved in that. It wasn't planned, it's just my plan. But I'm saying that a lot of changes, they did try to make the changes, but it was not significant because you're talking about a whole body of students, and yet you want to take 2 or 3 or 4 and stick them in 2 or 3 grades.
Well, they picked.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
they asked me if I would go,
Right.
and I said, well, I've been here all this time. I'll stay where I am, and was very honored to graduate at William Hooper Councill High School. It was good enough for me.
Right.
All of those years,
Right.
it'll be good enough for one more.
Well, I understand I was assigned to Huntsville High, but I wasn't here to take that job. But they did. My point is, key assignments were made, but it has nothing to do with what should have been done and needed to be done.
Right.
Well, are there any final things that you didn't get a chance to share today?
What he said is a lesson for all of us. And I keep going back to that because there is no higher standard than love and what love can do. And I was happy that he did that at the wedding. And I got a copy, both of them, his speech and the copy written by someone else. But it filled in what my note-taking on TV couldn't do. But I was happy to experience that.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well,
We're so grateful for you sharing so much with us and digging back to make sure that all of this is something that's recorded for future generations. And you have done so much good work with your thesis as well, and so we're grateful for that. And we want to try to make that information and the information you've shared with us today something that future generations are going to know, growing up in Huntsville, that this is such an important part of our history and legacy and community, is the strength that came out of this experience and the strength that birthed this experience.
Yeah.
So we really thank you for your time. And
Well, I'm
it's been a
happy to
delight.
do it, and I'm happy that God spared me to be here today.
We would like to
make this
present this lovely floral arrangement
It's
to
a
you
gorgeous arrangement.
for our
How pretty.
gratitude, and it is from
It is
Albert's
gorgeous.
Florist.
Gorgeous.
And,
Thank you.
It's the least that we can do in
It's
in
no
our,
least there. It's beautiful.
We're happy that you have shared so tremendously of your experiences
Well, I thank
and
you.
your time.
I thank you.
So we thank everyone who has joined us from afar as well, and hope that this is something that can prove as valuable for future generations as
I'm
we
sure
feel
of
it is
that.
today.
I'm sure of that.
So we thank you. We thank everyone who joined us, and I think that's what we have for today.
Thank you.
Thank you.